Hey guys, tonight we begin with the forgotten daughters of the first woman, the ones Scripture never named, but who lived, bled, bore children, and buried sisters beneath unmarked stones. While their brothers built altars and legacies, they gathered grain in silence, whispered lullabies no scroll remembered, and carved their wisdom into ash before it was blown away. This isn't the story you were told. It's the one that was left out. But tonight, we remember them. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake to the sound of leaves breathing, not rustling, breathing. Because here, in the garden, even the trees inhale, the grass exhales warmth, the air tastes like ripe figs, and something older, like memory. You open your eyes, and the sky opens with you, soft and gold and humming. The animals do not fear you. The river does not move unless you look at it. You step barefoot through a world that was not built for you, and yet responds to your presence, like it remembers something it can't say. There's no pain in your body, no hunger, no shame, just the strange sensation of being, of touching a vine and having it curl toward your hand, not out of need, but recognition. The birds tilt their heads when you pass. The lion blinks like a sleepy house cat. A butterfly lands on your arm and doesn't leave. You are not new here. You are not intruding. You just are. But no one calls your name, because you don't have one. Adam is near. You see him walking, tall and curious, his hands on everything, naming things like it's a game. He laughs when he says elephant. He frowns when he tries armadillo. You watch him touch a flower and call it beautiful. You watch him look at a fish and call it good. You wait. He never looks at you. You think maybe he can't see you, but he can. You know he can, because once, just once, his eyes met yours, and he blinked, like he wasn't sure if you were light or shadow. Then he looked away. Eve sees you. She doesn't speak to you either, but she knows you. She feels you in the way her footsteps land more softly when you're near. She breathes deeper when you lie beside her in the grass. You braid reeds into her hair and she hums. You sleep under the same fig tree and she never moves when your fingers graze hers in the dark. You were the second heart she grew after Adam, not a daughter, not a sister, something else, something older. The garden doesn't question your presence. It opens for you. The fruit drops when you're hungry. The vines part when you walk. The lambs curl beside you at night, their tiny hearts beating against your ribs like lullabies. You don't bleed. You don't age. You don't ache. But you wait. And in the waiting, you wonder if you were a mistake. You are not named in the clay. You are not mentioned in the scrolls. You are not carved into any tree. When the angels come, they do not speak to you. When the stars gather to sing, they do not say your name. You start to wonder if you were meant to be a breath that simply never turned into a word. But you remember. You remember the moment you were formed. Not from earth, not from rib, but from the silence between Eve's laughter and her sorrow. The space where God looked away and something else slipped through. You were not sculpted. You were spilled. A consequence of love that was never supposed to exist outside of the story. You are the margin between chapters, the comma no one reads aloud. You are the question mark that Eden tried to erase. Still, you are here. You hum songs that haven't been written yet. You draw shapes in the soil that look suspiciously like letters. You pull your hair back with a thorned vine and bleed a little, just to see what it feels like. You teach the raccoons how to wash their hands. You whisper into the ears of the trees, and they sway like they're listening. And you watch. You watch Adam name everything but you. You watch Eve grow restless. You watch the serpent slither, slow and deliberate, toward the tree. You watch the fruit dangle like a secret too sweet to keep. You don't stop her, because you know what happens next isn't sin. It's story. And stories finally have room for someone like you. You weren't pulled from Adam's side. You weren't shaped while he slept. You didn't come into the world to be gazed at like a fresh invention. You were born differently, quietly, violently. From the ache between Eve's ribs, not his, not from clay, not from breath, but from the kind of pain that doesn't get a name until much, much later. No one saw it happen. Not even Eve. One morning she just woke up and knew something was missing. A pressure, a hollow, a soreness in her side, like something had been pulled from her. Not stolen, not severed, just given. She pressed her palm to her chest, looked at the sky, and whispered something in a language no one had taught her. That's when you came. You didn't fall from the stars. You didn't rise from the ground. You stepped forward from her shadow, like a secret trying to become real. She looked at you and did not scream. She did not name you. She just blinked once, slow and wet-eyed, and then held out her hands. You didn't cry. You didn't speak. You just curled into her lap and listened to her heartbeat, the way ocean shells listen to waves they'll never see again. She braided your hair with fig leaves and asked no questions. Not because she didn't have them, but because she already knew the answers would hurt. Adam didn't ask where you came from. He didn't look at you long enough to wonder. He walked past you like you were wind, or dust, or maybe just the kind of thing men learn to ignore without knowing why. The animals noticed, though. The doe nuzzled your shoulder. The wolves bowed their heads when you passed. Even the serpent coiled a little tighter, watching you with eyes that looked suspiciously like comprehension. Creation knows its own. You didn't walk behind Eve. You walked beside her. You picked herbs she didn't know were edible. You pointed at the stars and called them by colors instead of names. You never asked why Adam had dominion. You only asked why anyone needed it. You weren't made for anyone. That was your curse. That was your freedom. While Adam tilled and named, and Eve bore and wept, you stitched vines into clothing and carved strange symbols into bark. Symbols that made Eve flinch. Symbols that made the birds stop singing. You made music with rocks and hollow bones. You made fire once, just once, and never told anyone how. And when Eve bled for the first time, you didn't look away. You knelt in the grass and touched the red like it was holy. She cried into her hands. You placed petals in her hair. That night, she whispered something into your ear. Something about a garden that didn't want her anymore. Something about a God that hadn't spoken since. You never met him. Not really. Not directly. You felt him sometimes, when the wind changed without warning, or when the sun pulled too hard on your skin. But he never talked to you. Not like he talked to Adam. You were the unspoken part of the story, the footnote in flesh. You were not Eve's burden. You were her witness. The one who saw the way her eyes changed after she tasted knowledge. The one who held her hair back when she vomited that first night, when her stomach couldn't hold the truth. The one who didn't ask if she regretted it, because you already knew the answer. She never said she was sorry. She only said she was awake. And so were you. You were not Eve's shadow. You were her echo. And echoes, even in silence, always return. They never told you Eden had midwives. But it did. Just not the kind with robes or titles or clean hands. It had you. It happened one morning. Though morning in Eden is a loose term. Time didn't move the way it does now. The sun didn't rise. It just softened. The light turned pale, like it had been holding its breath all night. You were gathering figs with your bare hands, sticky with sweetness, when you heard it. a sound that didn't belong in paradise, a sound that cracked something in the air. Eve screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It wasn't surprise. It was deeper, lower. A sound dragged from the ocean floor of her ribs. You dropped the figs. You ran. You found her on her knees by the river, clutching her stomach like it was on fire, her skin slick with sweat, her breath short, sharp, her eyes wild and unblinking. You'd never seen blood before. Not like this. Not running between someone's legs, thick and frightening and alive. You knelt beside her, your hands trembling, your breath sinking with hers out of instinct. No one had taught you what to do, but something in you knew. This wasn't death. This was birth. She bit her lip so hard it split. You wiped her forehead with leaves. You held her hand as her body bent and folded and tore open like the garden had never intended to hold this kind of pain. And still, the trees didn't look away. The river paused. Even the wind stilled. Like it, too, was afraid to breathe wrong. You didn't know what was happening until you saw it. A head. A face. A scream that wasn't hers. A child. Born into your hands, slippery and silent. Eyes closed. Fists clenched, like she already knew what this world would demand of her. Eve collapsed backward into the grass, her chest heaving, her body shaking like thunder trying to leave through skin. You cleaned the baby with your hair. You cut the cord with a sharp stone. You placed the girl on her mother's chest and listened to both their hearts as if they were drumbeats in a war only women would ever understand. No angels came. No heavenly music played. The sky didn't sing. It just blinked. Eve wept, not with joy, not yet, with relief, with exhaustion, with something else you couldn't name. You sat beside her and watched the blood soak into the soil. The grass didn't turn brown. It turned crimson, and for the first time, Eden looked stained. You weren't supposed to see this. You weren't supposed to be here. This part of the story wasn't written. It was whispered, hidden, a secret, too sacred to be included in the official scroll. Because paradise, they say, is a place without pain, without labor, without mess, and yet here you were, covered in it. Later, Adam came. He didn't run. He walked, carefully, quietly. He looked at the baby like she was a new animal he hadn't named yet. He touched her forehead, then walked away. No words, no joy, just silence, like he didn't know what to do with something born outside of his ribcage, something born of pain instead of sleep. You buried the afterbirth yourself in the crook of a tree's roots. You didn't know why, only that it felt wrong to leave it out. The tree bloomed differently after that. Darker flowers, heavy petals, the kind bees avoid. You didn't tell anyone. You were the first witness to a miracle no one wrote down, and no one would remember you for it. You were there when the blood hit the grass. You were there when the scream split Eden in half. You were there when the first daughter was born, cradled not by God's hands but by yours. And that's why the story won't mention you, because you were the first pain in paradise, and the first secret. You were there when she bit it, not in the clearing, not beneath the tree, but later, after the sky dimmed like it had just seen something it couldn't unsee, after the birds stopped singing and the air thickened with something heavier than smoke, something like knowing. She came home different, not broken, not cursed, just older, not in years, in eyes. Her walk was slower, her breath tighter. She looked at her hands like they were no longer hers. And when you reached for her, when you tried to braid her hair like you always did, she flinched. Just a little, but enough. Enough for you to feel the silence wedge itself between your ribs. The fruit didn't kill her, but it killed something else. You didn't ask what it tasted like. She wouldn't have told you. She barely spoke at all. Her voice had gone low and distant, like it was traveling from somewhere much farther away than her mouth. She sat near the fire that night and stared into it like she was watching herself burn. You tried to be small. You curled beside her and didn't make a sound, but she didn't wrap her arm around you like she used to. She just sat there, eyes wide, like the flames were whispering secrets only she could hear. That was the night you realized childhood had an expiration date, and it came early. The next morning, Adam wouldn't meet her eyes, or yours. He walked in circles, muttering to himself, hands clenched at his sides like he was trying to hold something in or beat something back. He looked at the trees like they'd betrayed him, like the vines knew, and maybe they did, because nothing grew quite the same after that. The fruit still hung heavy on the branches, but it didn't look delicious anymore. It looked like bait. You asked her if it hurt. She didn't answer. She just brushed your cheek with her thumb, then wiped her hand on her tunic, as if even that small tenderness might stain her. Her eyes weren't sad. They were tired. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep. The kind that sets in behind the bones. That's when she started covering herself. Not out of shame, out of grief. A grief too deep to be naked anymore. You didn't know what sin was. No one had explained that part yet. But you knew the sound of something ending. The way joy got quiet. The way laughter never came back after it left. The way your mother stopped humming. And so you stopped asking questions. Because you could feel it now too. The shift, the weight, the sharpness in the air. The way the animals looked at you, nervous, as if they sensed you were something new, something capable of damage. That's when the naming stopped. Adam no longer gave out words. He hoarded them. You watched him rename her Mother of All the Living, but it didn't sound like a blessing. It sounded like a warning, like a label pinned to her chest that meant, you'll carry it all now. She bled more often after that. Not just from her body, from her spirit. You could see it in the way she touched things, gently, as if the garden might recoil. You tried to make her smile once, told a joke about the fox who stole a fig. She didn't laugh. She just kissed your forehead and turned away, murmuring something about how not everything is meant to be innocent forever. You didn't understand what she meant, not then, but you do now. Because you remember the last night you were allowed to climb into her lap. The last night her arms were still soft. The last night she told you a story about stars instead of survival. You remember the way her voice cracked at the end. Not from the tale, from the truth sitting behind it. That this was the last time you'd get to be a child. The fruit didn't kill them, but it buried something. And you were there at the funeral. He named the lions first. Of course he did. They were loud and golden and full of spectacle. He stood tall in the clearing, eyes blazing with purpose, and gave them a word like thunder. Lion. It sounded like something that could tear the world open. Then came the camels, the bears, the peacocks, the elephants. One by one, the creatures passed before him like a living parade, and each received a name as if it were a crown. You watched from the edge of the trees, barefoot, unnamed. You weren't jealous. Not yet. Just curious, wondering when it would be your turn. He named the rivers next. And the trees, the rocks, the wind. He gave a name to the way the leaves shivered at dawn. He named the moon's reflection in the water. He named shadows. You didn't even know shadows needed names until he said they did. And once he named them, they belonged to him. That was the rule. If he said it out loud, it was his. You waited. He never said yours. You walked past him once. Just once. Close enough that your arm brushed his. He didn't flinch. He didn't stop. He just kept listing things. Kept assigning syllables like they were holy. As if the world was nothing until his mouth touched it. And you were already real. Too real. You didn't need naming. Which, to him, meant you didn't need noticing either. You asked Eve once why he never looked at you. She paused mid-sentence, mid-weaving, mid-breath. Her fingers stilled. Then she said, "He names what he understands." And then, quieter, "He doesn't understand you." So you named yourself. You found a stone with veins that looked like rivers and whispered something over it. Soft, sharp, unspeakable. Not a name, exactly. More like a sound only the trees would answer to. You carved it into bark. You sang it into the water. You waited to hear it echoed. It never came back, but it never left you either. The beasts came to you differently than they did to him. They didn't bow. They didn't wait for titles. They curled beside you in the shade. They ate from your hand. They didn't need words to feel safe. You never owned them. And maybe that's why they trusted you more. Sometimes you stood beside Adam while he worked, close enough that your shadows touched. You watched him mold language like clay, pressing it into everything except you. He gave the sun a name. He gave the stars instructions. But you stayed outside the alphabet, a blank space in a world of definitions. He named Eve, eventually, with great ceremony, with pride, flesh of his flesh, bone of his bone, a name like a verdict. She smiled, but her eyes flicked toward you, just for a second, like an apology she couldn't say out loud. You wondered what it meant to be seen only through someone else's story. Because if you weren't named, were you even meant to exist? You started writing things down, in soil, on leaves, in the corners of the garden where no one else went. You gave names to things Adam hadn't noticed. The sound roots make underground, the way moss feels at midnight, the soft groan of a fig tree before it blooms. You didn't shout your discoveries, you whispered them, and the world heard you anyway. But you still wanted to hear your name, just once, from someone else's mouth. Not for power, not for ownership, just to know you were real to someone besides yourself. It never happened. When the angels came, they asked for Adam. When they spoke, they used titles: caretaker, steward, man. When they saw you, they smiled politely, like you were part of the scenery, like you were an extension of someone else's existence. You bowed, then turned away before they could see your face fall. You were never named, but you named everything he didn't see. And maybe that's why the beasts followed you in the dark. Because you never needed a name to be real. You only needed someone to look. It started with a dull ache, low, deep, like a storm gathering behind your bones. You didn't know what it meant. You hadn't fallen. You hadn't been hurt. But something inside you had turned against itself. Quietly, secretly, like a rebellion too, ashamed to make demands. You woke up sticky. Not sweat, not water, but red. Bright at first, like crushed berries. Then darker, heavier, as it soaked into the moss beneath you. You stood slowly, half asleep, half afraid, and the ache followed. Between your legs, down your thighs, into the earth. You pressed your hands between your legs and brought them up to your face, expecting mud. Instead, blood, warm, wet, ancient. But there was no word for it, no frame of reference. No one to say, "This is normal." No one to tell you what it meant to leak from a place that had never been touched. You tried to walk. Every step hurt, not from the pain, but from the silence, the unbearable quiet of not knowing if this meant you were dying. You didn't cry, not right away. You just looked down at the red staining your skin and felt something shift in the air around you. The birds didn't sing that morning. The trees leaned away ever so slightly. The vines that usually curled toward your ankles didn't move. Even the river seemed to avert its eyes. You were dirty now. That's what it felt like, even if no one said it. You went to Eve. She was sitting by the fire, sewing bark into a crude sling for the baby. Her hands moved slow, her shoulders hunched. You approached her like a ghost, your hands trembling, the red now dried and flaky on your inner thighs. She looked up and saw your face before she saw your body. She knew. She didn't speak. She stood, pulled you into the shadows, and handed you a piece of cloth she'd been saving for the baby. You held it to yourself and winced. She didn't flinch. She didn't comfort you. She just said, "It comes for all of us," and turned away. That was it. That was the entire explanation. Later, you sat alone by the fig tree, watching the blood soak through the cloth, wondering what else would be taken from you now. You felt betrayed, not by God, not by Adam, not even by Eve, by your own body, by the thing you lived inside of, this vessel that now marked you as something other, something changed. You tried to wash the blood off in the river. It didn't come clean. Not really. The stain lingered on your skin, like a memory. And worse, the fish swam away from you. The water, which once rippled when you touched it, stayed still now, like it didn't want to be involved. You stayed out of sight for the rest of the day. That night, you couldn't sleep. You curled into yourself on the cold earth and watched the stars through the canopy above. You wondered if the stars had ever bled, if the moon knew what this was, if the angels had words for it, if God did, if he'd seen it and decided not to speak. There was no ritual for this, no fire, no song, no naming, just you, alone, dripping into the dirt. Eve didn't speak of it again. Adam never asked. And the child, too young to know, too pure to care, she still reached for you, still curled into your side. But something in you had cracked open. You weren't soft anymore. Not in the way you had been. Not in the way you'd wanted to stay. Later, much later, you would learn this wasn't a curse, that this was life folding itself forward, that this blood was not a punishment, but a preparation, a path, a pulse. But not then. Then, it was just red, and silence, and the garden pretending it didn't see you. The ground east of Eden is not cursed all at once. It takes time. The trees grow thinner, the soil more stubborn. The wind forgets how to be gentle. You don't notice it at first. You're too busy carrying water in a cracked pot, too busy watching the sky for signs that never come. But little by little, the garden disappears. Not behind you, but inside you. You start to forget her face. Not on purpose, not as betrayal, just slowly, like a painting left in the rain. You remember her eyes, but not their color, her voice, but not its shape. You remember her hands, how they moved, how they cupped your cheek after the first time you bled, but the lines of her knuckles blur. She doesn't fade in a dramatic way. There is no great forgetting, no final moment where her memory slips into silence. It's more subtle than that. One day, you wake up and realize you can no longer picture her mouth when she laughed. Just the feeling of it, just the echo. No one speaks of her anymore. Adam works from sunup to nightfall, eyes narrowed, hands blistered, jaw locked like he's chewing on the punishment of being alive. When he does speak, it's only of crops, of fences, of the way the wolves circle closer this year. He doesn't speak her name. You're not sure he remembers it. Your brothers never knew her. Not really. Cain looks through people. Abel looks at the ground. Both of them walk like something is chasing them. Maybe it is. They don't ask about her. And when you bring her up, once, quietly, Cain says, "We all have our burdens," and walks away. The fire pit is where you feel her most. At night, when the wind dies and the stars watch without blinking, you sit near the flames and stare at the embers. That's where she used to sit. That's where she wept when the world first started falling apart. She never cried during labor, never flinched when she was bleeding or bruised. But the fire, that's when she let go. When she thought no one was watching, you watched. You still see her there sometimes, in the way the smoke curls, in the way the flames crack, like bones being set. But you don't know if it's memory or grief wearing her face. There are no mirrors here, no rivers still enough to reflect you. You've never seen your own face clearly. You only know what it looks like when others react to it, when Cain glares, when Abel blinks too long, when the old man avoids your eyes. You used to look like her. You hope you still do, but even that's fading. You try to draw her once, in the dirt with a stick. It doesn't work. The lines won't stay still. The nose is wrong, the mouth too flat, the eyes too empty. You rub it away with your palm and whisper an apology, though you're not sure who you're saying it to. There are no stories anymore. Not the kind she told, not the kind that make you feel warm. Adam tells facts, instructions, warnings. He doesn't believe in wonder. He believes in rules and sweat and survival. You ask him once what your mother was like before the fall. He doesn't answer, just looks at you like you asked where dreams go when they die. You keep her in pieces, in the weight of the basket on your hip, in the way you wash your hands with ashes, in the lullabies you hum but can't finish. You keep her in the way you braid your hair tight so it won't catch fire, in the way you press your forehead to the ground when you feel like screaming. There is no lineage, no scroll, no family tree, just bruised feet, calloused hands. Children who will grow up not knowing who made their clothes or wiped their mouths or buried the afterbirth beneath the fig tree. You wonder if that's what this place does. Eats the women first, then forgets to say thank you. You try not to forget. You try so hard. But the soil here is dry, and memory doesn't root well in exile. You were not Cain. You were not Abel. You were not chosen. Not to carry the line, not to offer the sacrifice, not to take the fall. You were the space between their names, the breath before the blood spilled. Cain built things. He stacked rocks like he was daring God to knock them down. He walked heavy, like the earth owed him answers. His anger was loud even when he said nothing. Abel, by contrast, moved like apology. Soft hands, softer voice, always watching his feet as if the ground might open and swallow him for dreaming too boldly. You were neither. You weren't the builder. You weren't the offering. You were the one sent into the fields before dawn. The one who didn't make altars but cleaned the soot after they burned. The one who bent low to gather grain because no one else would, because someone had to. You were not asked if you believed in the God who stopped speaking. You were not asked if you wanted to stay. You were not asked what it meant to be a woman in a world that didn't record your breath. You were just handed a basket and told where the sun would rise. Cain never looked at you unless you were in his way. Abel looked at you too much, but only when he thought you wouldn't notice. You noticed. You noticed everything, because you'd learned early that survival wasn't about strength or sacrifice. It was about silence and timing and never, ever being the story. They got stories. You got dust. You watched them fight once. Not the last time. Not the fatal one. An earlier skirmish. Something about the sheep wandering too close to the barley. Cain's voice like thunder. Abel's like splinters. You stood at the edge of the field, arms full of sheaves pretending not to listen. But your fingers dug into the wheat. Because you knew. Even then, you knew. This would end with blood. Not because of God. Not because of jealousy. But because the world was small, and no one had taught the sons of Adam how to sit with disappointment. That night, Abel sat by the fire and asked you why Cain hated him. You didn't answer. You just handed him bread and looked away, because there was no safe answer. Because love in this house was like a knife. You could hand it over or hide it behind your back. But either way, someone would end up bleeding. You didn't witness the murder. You were in the fields, again. Knees in the dirt, hands stained with the green of crushed stems. You heard the scream. You stood up too fast and the sky tilted. When you ran, the air felt wrong, like the trees were bracing for something that had already happened. You found Cain first, face pale, eyes full of something you couldn't name. Not guilt, not yet, just the look of a boy who expected the world to collapse and was confused when it didn't. Then you saw Abel. He looked like he was sleeping, except for the shape of the ground beneath his skull, the color pooling beneath him. You dropped the basket, fell to your knees, reached out with shaking fingers, and pulled them back before you touched him. Because you knew, somehow, that touching a dead body makes you feel more alive than you want to be. Cain left. You don't remember when. 1 second he was there. The next, just wind. No one asked where you were when it happened. No one asked what you saw. No one asked what it does to a girl to wash the blood out of the soil with her bare hands. Afterward, you spoke less, moved quieter, ate slower. You learned that your story would never be carved in stone. That legacy is something brothers kill for and daughters clean up after. You were not Cain. You were not Abel. You were not asked. But you remember. And some days, remembering is its own kind of offering. The baby didn't cry at first. That was the strange part. She came into the world quiet, blinking, mouth open, but no sound. Just that eerie stillness of a newborn who hasn't yet decided if the world is worth screaming at. Eve held her to her chest, blood running down her thighs, and rocked back and forth on the packed earth, like that motion might summon mercy. You stood just outside the circle of firelight, arms crossed, waiting for someone to say your name. No one did. Eve whispered something to the baby. You couldn't hear what. You didn't ask. You were older now, old enough to know when not to intrude. You had already fetched the water, already boiled the cloth, already crushed the herbs she didn't thank you for. The work was done. The miracle, such as it was, didn't need you anymore. When the baby finally wailed, it sounded like a question God wasn't going to answer. Later, when the child slept, Eve started to dig. No ceremony, no instruction, just her fingers clawing at the dirt, like they remembered something her mind had forgotten. She didn't ask for a spade, didn't call for Adam, just dropped to her knees and began scraping a hollow into the ground beneath the tree, where the sun used to filter through like grace. You watched from a distance. The baby nestled against your chest, swaddled in the last good cloth. You weren't told to hold her, but you had, because someone had to. She carved the cradle herself. Not wood, not woven reeds, just dirt, just a hole barely wide enough for a child to rest in. She lined it with dry grass, patted it flat, adjusted the shape with the side of her hand. She made it deep, like she didn't trust the wind not to steal what she'd made. And still, you weren't jealous. Not exactly. You just faded. A little more. There was a time when she used to sing to you, before sleep, when the world was smaller, softer. You'd lie with your head in her lap, and she'd hum a tune she claimed the stars taught her. That stopped after the second son, after Cain came, after she forgot how to look at you without apology. You tried to remember the first cradle, yours, but there wasn't one. There had been a patch of moss, a folded tunic, a corner of the hut warmed by stones. You were placed there like a tool after use. You learned to cry softly, so as not to be scolded for drawing breath too loudly. You learned to sleep without rocking, without humming, without arms. You didn't blame her. Not really. But the absence lingered, like a taste that never leaves your mouth. When she was done digging, Eve placed the baby in the hollow, just for a moment, just to rest. The child blinked up at the sky like it was something familiar. Eve sat back, dust on her palms, her face unreadable. The cradle looked too much like a grave. Adam arrived late, as usual. He stood over the scene and nodded like it was a good idea. Said something about necessity. Said nothing about beauty. Said nothing about daughters. You handed the baby back. Eve took her without meeting your eyes. Later, you returned to the cradle alone. The baby was gone, carried inside, swaddled, named. You stayed behind, tracing your fingers along the indentations in the earth, feeling the grooves her hands had left. The impression of the child's weight. You whispered something into the dirt. A lullaby you hadn't sung in years. The wind didn't answer. The stars didn't echo it back. You stood up, brushed the dust from your hands, turned toward the darkness. You had other work to do. You weren't jealous, just forgotten, because the first cradle was dug into dirt, and it wasn't yours. It didn't happen with a celebration. There was no feast, no music, no veil, just a nod from Adam and a longer one from the other father, and suddenly you belonged to someone else. You were given, not asked. Your body like a tool or a parcel of land, exchanged for a promise of peace between two bloodlines that weren't different enough to matter but distant enough to spark tension. Cain's descendants and Seth's. Or maybe cousins born from different wombs. None of it clear, none of it cared for. What mattered was what you could produce, what your hips might yield, what your silence might solve. The man you were given to didn't look at you like a gift. He looked at you like a solution. His hands were dry. His eyes stayed low. He didn't speak your name the first night. You're not sure he ever learned it. Maybe he thought you were a symbol, a gesture, a female-shaped offering to settle old arguments that had nothing to do with you. You didn't scream. You just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you'd been this quiet when you were born, wondering if your mother had clenched her fists like you were doing now, wondering if she had felt this cold. Marriage was a thing decided by men who didn't bleed. It was invented in the same breath as fences and debt and naming rights. Before there were laws, there were arrangements. Before there were temples, there were trades. Your future sealed with a handshake and a grunt. No witness required. No blessing needed. You never said yes. You never said no. You just stood still when they tied the leather around your wrist and handed you over like a borrowed cloak. No one mentioned love, or choice, or anything resembling a question. You weren't a bride. You were a boundary line. You learned quickly how to soften your voice when his mood was sharp, how to move silently across the hut when his shoulders sagged with frustration, how to disappear when his eyes turned red with wine or hunger or whatever ache made him press your face into the ground without asking. No one asked where the bruises came from. No one asked if you were happy. No one asked if the blood that came afterward was too much or too soon. They only asked when the baby would come, as if a womb could bloom just from being claimed. You tried to speak once, sat with Adam and Eve by the fire, knees tucked beneath you, hands trembling. You said, "What if I don't want this?" The silence afterward was deafening. Adam looked away. Eve pressed her lips together like someone trying to swallow glass. And then Eve said, "Wanting isn't part of it." That was the end of that conversation. You didn't speak of it again. Instead, you learned to measure your life in chores and cycles. The way the bread rose, the rhythm of your bleeding, the calluses on your hands, the number of words you swallowed each day like bitter herbs. You counted days by how often he touched you, counted nights by how long it took to fall asleep. You watched other girls be given the same way, younger than you, quieter, wide-eyed and hopeful, not yet understanding what it meant to be smiled at in the morning and ignored by nightfall. You wanted to warn them, but what could you say? That the love they were promised was a ledger? That their bodies were not theirs? That the altar had been a bargaining table all along? So you taught them how to make the bread not burn, how to hide the bruises under ash, how to breathe quietly when pretending to sleep. You were not bitter. You were not loud. You were not asked. Marriage came before consent. And you, like so many, came after. It started before dawn, a cramp low in your belly, then another, tight and slow like the twisting of rope. You'd felt pain before, monthly, quietly, with no applause, no reward. But this was different. This had gravity. This pulled your spine into the earth and made your ribs forget how to lift. You called no one. There was no one to call. The others were sleeping, or pretending to, or waiting for the screaming to start before pretending they cared. You'd seen it before, in the eyes of women who were once girls, the way their faces changed after birth, not from joy, from knowing, from surviving something no one ever explained. There was no midwife, no elder, just you, just the dirt floor, just the corner of the hut that you had swept clean the night before, almost like you knew. You pressed your back to the wall and breathed like you were holding something back, not just the baby, yourself, the tears, the sound, the rage. You bit your lip until it broke open, copper flooding your tongue. You didn't scream. You didn't want to give them the satisfaction of hearing it. Your water broke into your lap like a secret, warm, and shameful. You didn't look down. You just braced your hands against the clay and let your body do what it had been cursed to do. It took hours, or maybe minutes. Time broke apart under the weight of your pain. You remember the moment your hips split open, the feeling of something tearing that had never even had a name. Your breath left you. Your arms shook. Your legs went numb. You dug your fingers into the dirt and felt nothing except the unbearable presence of the thing inside you trying to become a person. And then, wetness, warmth, a sudden, sliding absence. The baby landed in your hands like a promise you weren't sure you could keep. A girl, silent. You panicked, rubbed her chest, cleared her nose, tapped her foot, whispered her name, even though no one had told you to choose one. She blinked once, then again, then screamed. You laughed. It was the first time you'd laughed in months, maybe years, maybe ever. You cut the cord with a sharp flake of stone, tied it with a thread from your own dress, washed her gently in a bowl of cold water, wrapped her in the cloth you'd hidden for this moment. No one helped. No one asked. The sky outside had turned pale with morning. You stepped out, knees shaking, hair damp, holding your daughter like a weapon, like a warning. The others gathered slowly. They stared. Adam nodded. Like this was another task completed. Your husband didn't look at you. He looked at the child and asked if it was a boy. You said no. He walked away. No one offered food, or rest, or congratulations, just silence. As if this was the natural order. As if pain didn't count, unless it made something they needed. You went back inside, held her to your chest, listened to her breathe. And for the first time since Eden, you felt something like holy, not because of what she was, but because of what you did. Alone, in blood, in silence, in defiance of a world that pretended women didn't shape it with their bare hands. There would be no feast, no naming ceremony, no record, but she was real, and so were you. The sky had watched, without comfort, without judgment, but it had watched. And maybe that was enough. She was different from the beginning. Didn't cry when she was born, didn't flinch at cold water or cling to your breast like the others. Her eyes were wide, dark, watching you with a calm, too ancient for a child who'd only just arrived. You thought it was a sign, maybe a blessing, maybe a curse. You'd stopped pretending to know the difference. She walked early, talked late, refused to eat what the others ate, spit out honey, bit the skin off apples but left the fruit. She'd sit for hours at the edge of the field, fingers buried in the soil, not planting, not weeding, just feeling it, like she was asking the ground a question it didn't want to answer. Adam said she was wild. Eve said nothing. The others avoided her. Even the animals didn't linger when she came near. The goats would turn their backs. The birds would quiet. You once caught her whispering to a fox who blinked and didn't run. She told you the wind had a name, but she couldn't share it. Not yet. You told her to hush, to come back inside, to act normal. She didn't. She never did. When the time came to teach her how to plant wheat, she scattered the seeds too wide, too deep, too carelessly. Nothing grew except weeds. Not the tidy green sprouts your hands had come to expect, but curling, stubborn things, twisted vines, bitter roots, leaves that bled yellow when snapped. She smiled at them, said they were prettier anyway. The elders said she was a problem, that she wouldn't marry, that she wouldn't be useful, that her strangeness would spread like mold if not cut out. You said she was young. You said she would learn, but she didn't. She wandered further each day, past the creek, past the hills. You found her once building small stone altars to no god you recognized. She said she was listening. You asked to what? She said, the pieces of the world that still remember. Her father called her broken. Her siblings called her cursed. You called her yours. But even that started to feel like a lie. The day the rain started, she vanished. No note, no trail, just footprints that stopped at the edge of a ravine. The sky was already grumbling, the air heavy with something that felt like consequence. You searched for hours, screamed her name until your voice cracked, dug through the brush, tore your hands on thorns. Nothing. You came back soaked, fevered, hollow. They asked if she ran away. You said no. You said she was taken. No one believed you. They said she was always odd, that she brought it on herself, that there had been whispers about her, that girls like her disappear. You stopped answering. Instead, you went to her weeded field, stood in the middle of it, as the first heavy drops began to fall. The vines were thriving, the roots thick and tangled beneath your feet. You knelt, dug your hands into the soil like she used to, closed your eyes, and for the first time, you listened. The earth said nothing, but something inside you stirred. You never found her body, never heard her voice again. But sometimes, when the sky splits with thunder and the wind scrapes the trees raw, you think you hear her name in it. Not spoken, not screamed, just known. The flood would come, the world would drown, and her strange little garden would be the only thing still blooming when the waters rose. She was the second daughter. She did not obey. She did not yield. And somewhere beyond the storm, she still doesn't. The stones were piled too carefully to be an accident. You knew the land, every bend in the river, every stubborn root that snagged your skirt, every place the soil changed from soft brown to angry clay. You had walked this path for years. And this hill, this one was new, low and rounded, not quite a grave, not quite a cairn, just a hump of earth stitched together with silence. The others passed it without noticing, or pretended to. You weren't sure which. You slowed, looked, felt something shift in your chest. Not grief, not fear, recognition. You came back alone at dusk, dug with your hands. It didn't take long. The earth here had already given up, dry, loose, like it had wanted her uncovered. Your fingers bled, your breath fogged the air. When you reached the bones, they were curled like a question no one had dared ask. She was small, not a child, but not full grown. Ribs fragile, skull cracked in one place, long healed over. Femur bent just slightly, as if she had limped through her short life and said nothing about it. There was no cloth, no marking, no amulet. just a bracelet of thorns still clinging to one narrow wrist, dried, brittle, but deliberate, woven, a crown for a limb, or maybe a warning, or maybe just the only thing she had left to give herself. You sat there for a long time. The sky burned itself out above you, stars blinking open, tentative and small. You didn't cry. Not yet. You just stared at the bones and waited for the memory that never came, because you didn't know her. Not really. Not her name, not her story, not the sound of her voice, but someone buried her. That means she mattered. Someone took the time to lift the stones, to fold her arms, to mark the place, however quietly. This world does not waste effort on the forgotten. If she was here, if she was buried, then someone, somewhere, loved her. And that did something to you. Because you'd seen the others, the ones left in ditches, in woods, in silence. You'd helped bury more women than the stories ever mentioned. The wives who bled out, the girls who wandered too far, the mothers who bore too many and broke apart. Most of them went nameless, even in death, covered in leaves, or ash, or nothing at all. But this one, she was wrapped in thorns. She was claimed. You brushed the dirt from her cheekbone, whispered a blessing you made up on the spot. No one had taught you how to bless the dead. The priests didn't speak to women unless their wombs were open. But this girl, whoever she'd been, deserved more than silence. So, you gave her words. You gave her yours. The others didn't understand when you returned home with blood under your fingernails and dust on your knees. They asked if you were lost. You said yes, because it was easier than explaining the feeling that had taken root in your chest, that cold, radiant ache, the knowledge that your lineage would never be written, but it could be buried, marked, made sacred by the ones who refused to forget. You went back the next day, and the next. You brought her flowers, stones, a piece of bread. You didn't know what she believed in, maybe nothing. Maybe the same God who let women vanish without footnotes, maybe a different one. Maybe herself. Each offering you left was a quiet declaration. I saw you. You were real. You are not nobody. You began to speak her into being, not by her name, but by her rest. And that's when it began to dawn on you. Lineage is not about blood, or names, or scrolls. It's about who we bury, who we remember, who we carry forward, even when the world does not. You found her bones beneath a hill of stones. And in that finding, you found yourself. They don't look you in the eye when they sit. Not really. Their eyes skim past your face like it's part of the furniture, like you're the warmth, not the fire, the table, not the feast. You are what holds the thing together, not what draws their praise. You've learned to expect that. You don't speak much at mealtime. Words die quickly here. Float for a moment, then drop into the stew. No one fishes them out. So instead, you speak the way the fire crackles, the way your sleeves stay rolled, the way your hands know how to knead, measure, listen to yeast as if it were a hymn rising. You say everything with bread, not the crusty kind that kings parade at weddings, but the daily kind, flat, warm, torn, not sliced. You learned how to stretch the flour just far enough when the rains didn't come. Learned how to hide herbs in the folds to trick the mouth into joy. Learned how to press the dough with the heel of your palm until it feels like breath and bruises an offering. They eat. Always. Even when they ignore you. Especially then. The men gather like they're the ones who hunted, as if catching a goat trapped in brambles is heroic, as if plucking bitter greens from a hill counts as conquest. They bring the raw and call it sacrifice. You make it holy. You make it edible. You make it last. And still, your name is not spoken. But your bread is. They ask for it, demand it, curse when it runs out. Say things like, "Who made this?" without expecting an answer. You never give them one, because the answer isn't a name. It's a sound, the soft rip of crust in half, the sigh of steam escaping the middle, the quiet reverence just before teeth sink in. That is your voice. That is your song. And they hear it, even if they don't know they do. You've watched them weep and say it's the weather, get quiet and say it's the wine, get angry and say it's the fire. But you know it's the memory buried in the taste. The way your bread makes them feel safe without knowing why. The way it tastes like something they forgot they needed. Your daughter once asked if it bothered you, being invisible. You looked at her hands, dusted in flour, looked at the dough rising beneath a woven cloth, looked at the men laughing outside, mouths still chewing your name. And you said, "Not always," because sometimes silence is a blade. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's strategy. But sometimes silence is a sermon. You've taught your daughters to bake, not just with ingredients, but with rage, with memory, with the parts of themselves no man has ever asked about. You show them how to fold in grief, how to let sorrow rise slowly, how to punch it down without apology. You tell them, without saying it, that legacy isn't in scrolls, it's in recipes, in the muscles of the forearm, in the calluses that come from repetition. You don't tell stories, you feed them. And still, you are heard. You are the sound of bread tearing, the sound of something whole becoming shareable, the sound of nourishment that doesn't ask permission to be sacred. They don't know your name, but they reach for your offering with both hands. And that, maybe, is enough. They never spoke her name at the fire, not properly, not with detail, just a glance, a shrug, a curling of the mouth, like the memory of sour fruit. Lilith, the one who wouldn't kneel, the one who opened her mouth too wide, the one who vanished into myth with her back unbroken. But you stayed, and that was your mistake. No one tells you this, but it's true. Staying makes you easier to fold, to mold, to swallow. They love a girl who endures more than a woman who escapes. And so they forgot you, not out of cruelty, out of convenience. You didn't fight like Lilith. You didn't fly into the sky and scream at the stars. You didn't summon demons or seduce angels. You didn't write your name in fire. You just obeyed. Softly, quietly, repeatedly. You washed the feet that kicked you. You bore the children that named you mother, but never asked what your name had been before. You were the blank space between stories, the glue in the lineage, the body they kept warm at night, but never praised by day. And they said, that made you good. They feared Lilith, but they forgot you. And somehow, that cut deeper, because at least fear has weight. Forgetting is airless, bloodless, a kind of death that keeps walking. You remember hearing one of the boys say it, Cain, or one of the others. At least she had a story. He meant Lilith, meant the way she left, the way her name still twitches in men's sleep. You were there when he said it, kneading bread, elbows deep in silence. No one noticed the way your jaw clenched. You've been told that obedience is holy, that staying is sacred, that endurance is proof of grace. But you know better now. You know that staying made you invisible. They built rules around Lilith, called her dangerous, slapped warnings onto every woman with a voice that didn't tremble. But for you, there were no warnings, just silence. Just your body turned into a path for others to walk on. Just your name swallowed by the generations who inherited your face but not your fire. You did what was asked. You bore what they needed. You stitched the world together with your back bent and your hands raw. And still, they called you less. Because you didn't run. Because you stayed. Because somewhere deep in your belly, you believed that being needed would someday turn into being seen. It didn't. You became the consequence of her defiance, the aftershock of her no, a living correction, a cautionary tale with no lines. You were the alternative they whispered about but never honored. Be like her, they said, meaning not like Lilith, but never really meaning like you. Because what does it mean to be the opposite of a rebellion? What does it mean to be the echo of someone else's refusal? You still dream about her sometimes. Not her face. You don't know what it looked like, but her absence. That space she carved out in the sky by saying, "I will not." The hole she left in Adam's ribs before they pulled Eve from the rest of him. The breath she didn't give back. You wonder if she sees you, if she mourns you, if she thinks you betrayed her by surviving like this. You didn't choose this shape. You just grew into it. And now, every daughter you raise carries the silence in her shoulders. Every time they say, "She was wild, but you are good," you feel another thread loosen in your chest. You wonder if someday one of your daughters will stop mid-kneel, will turn, will say, "No." You wonder if that will be the end of you, or the beginning. Because Lilith was a warning. But you are what happens when they think the warning worked. It's not where they said it would be. They pointed to the hills, to the olive groves, to the dark trees beyond the valley. But it wasn't there. You found it by accident, following the smell of rosemary and rot. A clearing pressed flat with time, quiet, unassuming, just a small rise by the riverbank where the soil felt unusually warm. No marker, no inscription, just rocks. Smooth, water-worn, stacked like they were ashamed to be there. Not a monument, a covering, as if the earth itself had something to hide. You knew before anyone told you, not because of what you saw, but what you didn't. No men came here, no tools left behind, no signs of tribute or ritual, just footprints, small, bare, always leading in and away. The daughters still come. They don't speak when they arrive, don't kneel, don't pray aloud. They just sit, in a circle, faces drawn, feet dusty, eyes fixed on the mound like it might breathe if they wait long enough. You joined them once, felt the hush settle over your shoulders like a cloak you weren't sure you deserved. One of them handed you a thorn blossom. Another gave you a strip of cloth. No one told you what to do with them. You figured it out. You placed the blossom between two stones, tied the cloth around your wrist. You didn't need her name to know she was yours. She had died alone, probably. That's what happens to women, with no sons, with no men to carve their memory into the bark of a tree or the walls of a cave. When their usefulness ends, their story is left to wind and insects. She was likely buried by her own hands, or her daughter's hands, or not buried at all, just covered. Like a secret, like something to be forgotten gently, without causing offense. But her daughters remembered. They remembered in the aching of their hips, in the silences they passed between themselves like heirlooms, in the ways their mothers stopped singing after certain seasons, in the lullabies that ended mid-note, in the way their fathers said, "She was good, but nothing else." You don't know what killed her. A fever, a fall, a slow undoing of the womb. But you know what erased her. Absence. Absence of witness. Absence of story. Absence of space in the world she helped stitch together. So the daughters return. Not out of ceremony, but necessity. Because if they don't, no one will. Because they understand the cost of silence, of being useful until you're not, of leaving behind only what others are willing to carry. You come back, year after year. You watch the pile grow. Not tall, not grand, but tended. The rocks shift slightly, never the same. A shell bracelet one year, a baby tooth another. One girl brought a dried pomegranate, said her mother used to feed them the seeds one by one, calling them jewels. You cried when you heard that. No one buried that girl with a marker, but they buried her with memory. That's something. You think sometimes about making a real monument, carving her a name, even if it's the wrong one, erecting something tall, stone, strong, letting the world see what it forgot. But the daughters don't want that. They want the quiet, the softness, the barefoot truth of it all. They want to cry without being watched, to remember without being corrected. They want to return, because even without a name, she's still calling them back. Through the weeds, through the fog, through the generations who speak with their feet instead of their mouths. And maybe that's the holiest kind of grave. Not the one chiseled in stone, but the one that blooms under bare heels, every year, without fail. You don't know when the dreams began. Not the soft ones, the fevered ones. The ones where your mouth is full of ash and your hands are stained with ink you don't remember holding. The ones where the air smells like oil lamps and burning bread, and women sit around a fire whispering names you've never heard but somehow ache to say. Azura, Aklia, Naima. The first time you heard them, it was in your sleep, carved into silence like a prayer, half recalled. They didn't arrive like thunder. They arrived like bruises, already formed, already tender. And when you woke, they stuck, buzzing, itching behind your teeth, like something important you'd forgotten to confess. You asked the elders. They said those names weren't real. You asked your father. He said Eve had sons, nothing more. You asked the priest. He smiled like he'd heard a joke and told you to concern yourself with righteousness, not riddles. But the names kept coming. Each night, different shapes. A girl with wild hair weaving feathers into her belt. A woman chanting while she crushed herbs between stones. A mother screaming alone in the reeds, blood between her knees and no one coming. And each time, a name. Azura, Aklia, Naima. You tried to write them down, once, on a shard of pottery. But your hand shook, and the letters slipped, like even the clay wasn't sure it had permission to remember. You buried the shard beneath your cot, told no one. But still, they returned. You began to see them in other women, in the tilt of a chin, in the way a girl spat into the dirt rather than answer her uncle, in the rhythm of fingers threading hair by firelight. They were there, not as ghosts, but as muscle memory. Lineage tucked into gestures, into stubbornness, into survival. You realized then, you weren't dreaming them. You were remembering. Not from stories, from before stories, from the marrow of the mothers who didn't make it into the scrolls, from the mouths of those who nursed while unnamed, who bled without burial, who taught their daughters not to cry too loudly because history prefers its women muted. These were the daughters of Eve, not the good sons who offered sacrifices, not the cursed sons who killed. The daughters, swallowed by footnotes and foot soldiers, by flood and famine, by the scribes who saw a woman's name and thought irrelevant, by the men who wrote down every measurement of the ark but not the names of the women who fed the builders. Azura, Aklia, Naima. You began to whisper them before sleep, not out loud, just under your breath, like flint beneath your tongue. It comforted you, somehow, anchored you, like maybe, if you said their names enough, they might return, not in body, but in presence, in defiance, in memory. One night, your daughter woke from her cot and asked who Naima was. You lied, said it was a dream, but the truth throbbed behind your ribs, because maybe she dreamed it too. Maybe it's not just you. Maybe every woman still carrying breath in her lungs and grief in her spine remembers them, not with facts, but with need. with that strange ache that sits at the base of your throat every time someone says there were only suns, and you feel your entire body flinch in disagreement. They were real. You feel them. In the tilt of the moon, in the weight of silence before dawn, in the sudden shiver you get when someone says Eve was the only one. They were here. They loved. They gave birth. They disappeared. And somehow, they left you the dreams. He said your name like it was something he'd borrowed, like he wasn't sure if it was yours or someone else's, like he expected you to answer, but wouldn't be surprised if you didn't. You met him during the harvest. He smelled like dust and barley, and you were 17, which meant you still mistook attention for affection. He smiled at you with the kind of smile men practice when they think no one is watching. Tilted, casual, laced with calculation. You fell for it. Because of course you did. Because no one had taught you what love should actually sound like, only what it should cost. He asked for you with 2 goats, a bronze clasp, and a nod. You said yes because saying no was never part of the vocabulary passed down to you. He remembered the goats. He remembered the clasp. He remembered to cover the roof when it rained, to check the fence when the wind was high, to oil his sandals before long walks. He remembered every word his mother ever said about cooking lentils, every riddle his father taught him at age 7, every slight from every neighbor going back 5 winters. But he never remembered your birthday. Not once. The first year, you said nothing. Thought maybe he was planning something late. Thought maybe there would be figs or honey or even just a flower left on your stool. Nothing came. You turned your face to the sun and told yourself not to feel disappointed. The second year, you reminded him a week before. He blinked, nodded, kissed your forehead like he was marking a doorpost, then promptly forgot. That night, he asked if there was any more stew. You said no. He didn't ask why your voice cracked. The third year, you reminded him 3 times. He said, "What does a birthday even matter?" You wanted to answer. You wanted to say, "It matters because it's the one day that proves I existed long enough to become me. That it was the day your mother tore open and screamed so you could breathe. That it was the day your name was first spoken aloud. That it was a thread, thin and shimmering, tying you to this earth." But you didn't say that. You said, "Nothing. It doesn't matter." And that's when you felt it, the quiet unraveling of your hope. It didn't fall apart all at once. It frayed, softly, silently, like the hem of a garment no one bothers to mend, because it still fits technically. It's still wearable, still fine. You told yourself he loved you in other ways. He fixed the door. He brought firewood. He didn't raise his voice when you burned the bread. He said you were steady, that you were reliable, like a donkey, like a roof beam, like something that only gets noticed when it breaks. He remembered the date his favorite ox died. He remembered the exact words his uncle said before choking on a fishbone. He remembered the number of steps between the field and the well. But he never remembered you. Not the way you wanted. Not the way you deserved. And that's the thing, isn't it? Love, when it forgets you, still demands your loyalty, still asks you to make the bread, warm the bed, hold the line. It doesn't apologize for its amnesia. It expects you to compensate for it, to remember yourself on his behalf. You started marking your birthday with a candle, not a feast, not a song, just wax and flame and silence. Sometimes your daughter would notice, ask what it was for. You'd say, "Just remembering." And that was true. Not remembering the man, not the goats, not the stew, just you. You were the woman who loved a man who remembered the color of his mother's apron, but not the day you were born. And still, you wake. And still, you breathe. And still, you remember. You heard it before the sky even changed. Not thunder, not wind, Not the shouts of men gathering wood or the creak of ancient trees falling under axes. No, what you heard was smaller, colder. A kind of breath the clouds take when they're about to weep. A hush that slid over the earth like a shroud, and you felt it in your joints, in the pit of your stomach, in the way your chickens stopped clucking for no reason at all. They didn't tell you, of course. You weren't one of the ones they tell things to. The message was passed, like everything else, through sons, through fathers, through the deliberate gestures of men, building something holy without inviting the hands that made their bread. You saw the frame of it rise in the distance, heard the hammers, smelled the pitch. You asked your husband what it was. He said, "It's not for us." You asked again, softer, slower. He said, "We're not the kind he chose." And that was that. The arc grew. Days stretched into weeks. No one looked you in the eye when you asked questions. Not your sons, not your neighbors, not the cousin who used to bring you herbs for your bleeding time. Their faces turned to stone. Their voices grew careful. And still, the rain hadn't come. But you could feel it. Like an old grief returned. Like the ache behind your knees when something heavy is about to arrive. You tried not to think about what it meant. Tried to keep boiling the lentils, keep the goats from wandering, keep the youngest one from chewing on figs too green. But it clung to you, this knowing. The world was about to drown, and you would not be spared. You went to the edge of the valley once, just to see it, the boat. It looked more like a building than a vessel, bigger than anything you'd ever seen. Its shadow stretched further than a field. You saw the sons of Noah moving like ants beneath it, placing beams, wiping sweat, tying ropes. Their wives walked nearby, baskets full of dates, of cloth, of something you couldn't name from that distance. You recognized one of them. You'd once braided her hair before her wedding. She looked away. And still, the rain didn't fall. Not yet. So, you prayed. Not with words. Not the ones the men used. You prayed with movement, with silence, with the careful folding of garments, with the placing of stones around the garden to keep the soil from washing away. You taught your daughters to listen for things the sky wouldn't say out loud. You said, "Stay near the trees. If they start to tremble, come find me." You said, "Don't drink too fast. Save the clean water." You said, "If the birds stop singing, we run uphill." They listened, because no one else would. And then one night, while grinding millet, you heard it. Not a storm, just a drop. Then another, like fingers tapping the roof of the world. Your daughters looked at you. You nodded. You did not scream, did not wail. You just gathered the blankets, the tools, the dried fruit. You wrapped your baby's feet in oil-soaked rags to keep them warm. You touched your eldest forehead and whispered, "You were always good." They didn't cry. There was no time. You didn't run to the ark. You knew better. You'd known for weeks, maybe longer. The boat was never for you. It was for them. For the ones with the names written in ink, not in blood. For the sons of the sons, the righteous ones, the remembered. You were none of those things. You were a daughter, not chosen. And still, you moved, not for salvation, but for survival. Because even when God doesn't speak your name, you remember it. And that, sometimes, is enough. It didn't come all at once. Not the way stories tell it. Sky breaking open like a wineskin, waves roaring like beasts. No, it came slowly, soft at first, almost gentle, like a child tugging at your hem. Just enough rain to keep you inside, just enough to make you nervous, just enough to tell you that the world was changing, and you weren't invited to whatever came next. You tried to count the days, but the sky stopped keeping time. The sun disappeared behind bruised clouds. The moon refused to rise. There was only gray, then darker gray, then water. At first it was just in the fields. Then it crept into the stones outside your door. Then under the door. Then through the door. And still, no one said your name. You tried to hold on to it, like a charm, like a talisman. Whispered it to yourself when no one was listening. Pressed it into your daughter's hands when she cried. Carved it into the wood of your stool with a blunt knife. Because if the world was going to forget you, it would have to pry your name from your hands first. But the water is greedy and patient, and it does not barter. You saw it take the gardens first, the animals that weren't 2 by 2, the family heirlooms, the books written in your father's hand, the rug your mother wove when she was still young enough to sing while she worked, the place you buried your first child. You watched it all vanish beneath a surface that didn't even ripple. You climbed higher, but there is no mountain tall enough when the sky itself decides to fall. Your husband called out for his brothers. Your son shouted prayers he never bothered to learn until now. Your neighbors sobbed and screamed and slipped under, but no one called your name. The ones who had names in the records, in the scrolls, in the genealogies of men, they had already gone. They were safe, lifted on planks of gopher wood and divine favor, preserved, protected, remembered. You were not. You were never written in the lineages, not as mother, not as wife, not as builder or bearer or anything but someone's. You were someone's daughter, someone's bride, someone's shadow. And now, not even that. You tried to tie your name to something solid, wove it into a strip of cloth, and wrapped it around your daughter's wrist. You told her, "Remember this, even if everything else disappears." She nodded, wide-eyed, silent. She was too young to understand the weight of being erased. You weren't. You saw how the lists were made, in your father's house, in the market, in the temple. Names written down for trade, for worship, for legacy. Always names of men, and now those names floated, carried by wood and sky and stories that would one day be told as if you never existed beside them. The water didn't ask for permission. It didn't care what was just or kind or true. It just took the homes you swept, took the fields you planted, took the language you whispered into your baby's ears when they couldn't sleep. It took your name off the earth, like it had never been there at all. But you held on to it, even as the current pulled your feet from the ground, even as your arms grew tired from lifting others, even as the sky refused to break. You held your name behind your teeth like a secret too holy to drown. You weren't written in the book, but you were real. You bled. You gave. You knew love. You knew labor. You knew silence that cracked like bone. You do not float in the stories, but you remain in the bones of the world, pressed into mud, waiting to be remembered. There is no roof. There is no room. Just a slope of earth clinging to itself while the sky undoes everything above and below it. You press your back into the hill and dig your heels into the mud, but there is nothing solid left to brace against. The world is slipping, inch by inch, prayer by prayer, and you are still here, still breathing, still bearing down. No one sees you. The ark has already closed its mouth. Your neighbors are gone. Your husband is gone. Your name is gone, swallowed by a flood that writes no epilogues. But your body remains. It opens the way a grave opens, the way the first woman opened, with blood, with pressure, with pain that doesn't ask for applause. You scream. Not because anyone is listening, but because silence would kill you faster. The rain answers louder, hissing down the leaves above your head, pooling around your thighs, running red when the water meets what spills out of you. You think, maybe, this is how the world ends. Not in fire, not in judgment, but in a woman giving birth while no one watches. The contraction splits you in half. You become breath and bone and breaking. Your hands claw the dirt. Your mouth prays to a god that chose someone else. And still, you push. The hill shudders beneath you. You cry out again, raw and hoarse. Lightning flashes. For a second, the sky sees you. Then he is born. He slides into the world with a sound you've never heard before. Part gasp, part howl, part defiance. You catch him before he hits the stones. Hold him slippery and steaming against your chest, your fingers too numb to count his toes, but sure enough to know he is whole. He breathes. You breathe. The hill doesn't collapse. Not yet. You wrap him in the last dry cloth you own. Press his ear to your heartbeat. Whisper nothing, because words don't work here. Words belong to men who write lineage. Words belong to arcs. You have blood and arms and breath. That will have to be enough. The flood still rises. You can feel it in your calves now, lapping higher, reaching like a thief. You move uphill, dragging yourself with one hand, holding him with the other. You don't cry, not because you're brave, but because crying takes water, and the world has too much of that already. You find a ledge, a knot of roots, a crevice shallow enough to pretend it might hold you both. You press him there, tucked against your body, and teach him the only thing that matters now, how to hold his breath. Like this, you say, inhaling deep, your chest rising against the storm. Hold it until the thunder stops. Hold it until you hear me again. He blinks, tiny, quiet, alive. You don't know if he understands. You don't know if he'll live, but he knows you're trying. You cover his head with your hand. The rain drowns the path behind you. Somewhere far away, animals cry from behind wooden walls. Men sing songs of survival, dry and chosen and recorded. They will speak of justice, of wrath, of covenant, but they will not speak of you. They will not tell the story of the hill, of the woman, of the blood, of the boy born in the middle of drowning. You were not part of the promise, but you made a vow anyway. You gave life. You taught breath. You stayed when the world ran. You remained until the mud kissed your ankles and the sky forgot your name but not your scream. They do not see you, but they step around you. They build their homes just off center, never asking why the earth feels wrong beneath that one tree. They hush their children near the river without knowing why its edge runs cold, even in summer. They sleep with their backs to the corner of the room that never warms. You are not a warning. You are not vengeance. You are the first grief too old to scream and too young to forget. When the waters recede, the earth does not rejoice. It wheezes, it groans, it exhales bodies and secrets, and among them, you. Not your flesh. That part of you has long dissolved into the roots. But your ache? That stayed. The memory of your name, unwritten, uncalled, uneulogized, slips through the grass like a second wind. No one speaks it, but it pulls at their bones just the same. You died on a hill, not with ceremony, not with scripture, not even with a hand to close your eyes. You slipped beneath mud holding a child you barely had time to name, and when the world dried, no one came looking, because no one remembered to. And so, you linger, not in anger, but in the absence of recognition. You are the tremble before a lullaby, the silence between thunder and rain, the hush that falls when women pass graveyards barefoot. You are the breath the daughters of survivors hold without knowing why. Because what else could you do? There was no burial. There was no stone. There was no line in the genealogy scrolls that said, also, a mother who died, giving everything she had to a son who was never counted. You were not counted. And still, you remain. They call the new earth blessed. They call it cleansed. But you know better. You know what lies beneath the vineyards. The bodies that didn't fit inside the boat. The stories the survivors do not tell their children. The mothers who taught breath in floodwaters and were left behind in it. You are not bitter. You are not kind. You are still here. Sometimes a girl will kneel in the field and feel you, in the cold that lifts the hairs on her arms, in the sudden weight of sorrow she can't name. She will say, "I don't know why, but I feel like something is watching." It's you, not watching to curse, watching to witness, to see if this time someone will say your name. They never do. They read from the scrolls, and your son's sons are there, but not you. They trace the lineages and marvel at the math of survival, but they do not see the subtraction. You are subtraction. You are what was required but never honored. You are the empty place in the story where someone should have said, "There was a woman. She mattered." And even now, after the ark, after the rainbow, after the altar soaked in clean animal blood and holy relief, you drift among the stones of a world rebuilt without the ones who built it from the shadows. You touch no one, but you are felt. You speak no words, but your silence is inherited. Because this new earth, it is not as new as they think. It is built on bones, on sacrifice without recognition, on lineage without mothers. And somewhere, underfoot, you wait. You try to speak. At first, not with words. Your voice, what's left of it, is a breath in the trees, a tremor in the floorboards, a pause in the throat of a woman who suddenly forgets what she was saying. But you try. You hover near doorways where the wind always bends. You drift through the corners of rooms where daughters kneel to grind wheat with aching wrists. You press yourself into lullabies, into the knots of hair being braided, into the hush that falls before secrets are told. You whisper what you remember, that there were women before wives, that pain came before peace, that there was blood in Eden before there was blame, that the world didn't begin with suns, it began with silence, yours. But the new world doesn't want your truth. It's busy with blueprints. Altars rise like crops, neatly spaced, with stones brought from distant hills and stacked by hands too clean to remember labor. They name them for Adam's sons, Seth, Enosh, Mahalalel, as if piety can be inherited like land, as if bloodline is righteousness, as if they didn't descend from women who screamed into dirt and bled into bark and stitched the fabric of survival with fingers calloused from being forgotten. They etch names into stone. Yours isn't among them. You offer memory. They offer monuments. You whisper of the woman who ground her teeth through childbirth while the ark floated away, of the girl who disappeared into the trees, never seen again, but whose herbs still grow near the river, of the sister who taught the first hunter how to track by watching birds and was thanked with silence. But they don't want your stories. They want legacy. They want lineage. They want war. And so they sharpen their sons, teach them how to carry blades before they can carry consequence. The fathers gather around fires and tell tales of dominion, of naming things, of subduing beasts. The mothers sit farther back, stitch, stir, swallow what they know. You drift among them. You try to be louder. Not a whisper this time. A push. A breath hard enough to tip over a pot, to shake the latch of a door, to blow ash from the altar before the offering can catch flame. Still, they don't listen. One girl, just one, hears something. She stops mid-step while fetching water. The jug on her head tilts. She looks to the trees, wide-eyed. Later, she draws your face into the dust with a stick she isn't supposed to play with. Not your face exactly, just the shape of it, the sadness, the outline of a mouth that has no hymn to sing. Her father scolds her, wipes the dust clean. You try again. You place a memory into the bones of an old woman. A name she's never spoken before rises in her throat like a cough. Azura, she mutters in her sleep. No one knows what it means. They think it's just a dream. You press grief into the song of a widow. She hums it as she kneads bread. Her daughter says it sounds wrong. Her son says it sounds old. Her husband is long buried. You keep speaking. You tell them what they lost. The names of the first healers. The women who knew how to draw fever from flesh with leaves and hums and hot stones. You remind them of the midwives who squatted in caves with no witnesses but God. Of the daughters who refused to marry their cousins and disappeared into legend. You tell them that the first prayer wasn't spoken. It was screamed. And it wasn't by a man. It was by a girl who had no word for pain, so she used all of them. But still, they do not carve you into stone. They carve weapons instead. Altars, lineages, genealogies without mothers. They say the world is holy now. You know better. You know holiness was never about names on stone. It was about hands in dirt, blood on leaves, breath in cold air. You are not waiting to be worshipped. You are waiting to be remembered. But every time you speak, they hand the story back to the sons and call it sacred. You wait until they are asleep, until the fires in their altars die down to a breath, until the shouting stops, not because there is peace, but because even the war has grown tired of itself. That's when you rise, quiet, barefoot, the earth cold beneath you but familiar, like an old bruise. You step past the place where your name should have been, past the stone where only sons are remembered. You don't touch it. It would not recognize you. Stone has no memory for what it never carved. So you walk to the edge of what they call sacred, to the place behind the kitchens, behind the tents, behind the tent behind the tents, where the ash is dumped. Not from the altars, not the blessed kind, but the waste, burned bone, broken bread, bits of fabric, too stained to wash again. The ash of women's work, unmarked, unblessed. You kneel, and with one finger you begin to write. You don't know how long you've been holding the shape of it, the weight of it, your name. The name no one ever gave you, but that lived in the space between your ribs since before the world remembered to open its mouth. It moves through your hand like muscle memory, like grief. You drag your fingertip through the soot, curve after curve, letter after letter. It is not beautiful. It is not even legible, not to them, but to you. It is everything. It is proof, a footprint in the silence, a flare in a night that never called you back. You finish the last stroke with a hand that trembles, not from weakness, from relief. You wrote it. You wrote it. You exist. And then the wind shifts. It doesn't howl. It doesn't rage. It just moves. The way breath moves when someone turns away. The way the world turns without asking if you're ready. A soft gust. A sigh. And just like that, the ash is gone. Your name, gone. Lifted into the dark. Scattered into the same air that carries the prayers of men louder than you. You stare at the empty patch of earth. Still warm. Still black. Still silent. You don't cry. The tears dried up generations ago. You just sit back on your heels, palms open, watching the place where you almost existed. And you whisper, not your name, but something older. A sound you heard your mother make once, when she lost a child too small to have one. A low note, cracked and wrong and holy. The kind of sound no altar ever dared to echo. You say it once, then again, then again. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't call the ash back, but it lingers, in the air, in your chest, in the cracks of the stone they forgot to bless. Someone stirs in the tents. You go still. They don't see you. They never do. But you've learned to stop expecting that. You rise, ash still on your hands. You wipe it on your robe, Let it stain the hem like a signature no one will notice. You return to the fireless corner where you sleep. Curl against the ground that's colder now. You pull your knees to your chest and press your fingers to your lips. You tasted your name once. That's more than some. You close your eyes and drift. Not into sleep, into something older. A memory not yours. The echo of another woman's whisper. Another daughter's silence. The line is long. You are not alone in it. In the morning, someone steps in the ash. The one who hums while she grinds grain. She pauses, looks down, tilts her head like she almost hears something. Then the wind blows again, and she moves on. The ground is clean, but you are not gone. You are still there, in the soot under her fingernails, in the hush of the trees when she forgets why she's afraid, in the lull of the flame when no one's watching. You will write it again, even if the wind comes, even if the ash forgets, even if the fire never learns your name. You will write it again. It's wedged between two stones, so tight you almost miss it. Not buried, not displayed, just forgotten. A pale curl of parchment, brittle at the edges, tucked into the seam where one wall meets another. You find it when you're not looking, when you're gathering wood, when your hands are already dirty, your hair already tangled, your feet already blistered from walking paths no one thanks you for clearing. At first, it looks like nothing. A discarded scrap, a mistake. But your fingertips know better. They know the grain of something once sacred, something that carried weight before it carried dust. You pry it out slowly, like freeing a memory you're not sure wants to return. It resists, then releases. It's blank. No letters, no ink, no stamp of approval from the keepers of record. Just pale hide, stretched, tanned, smoothed flat, and left empty. Your breath catches. Not because it's worthless, but because it's familiar. You know this scroll. You know it the way your body knows pain before your mind names it. The way your spine knows cold. The way your womb knows grief. You run your hand across the surface, and it doesn't feel like emptiness. It feels like silence that used to speak. You remember, not the words themselves. Those are long gone, dissolved like salt in rain, but the shape of them, the rhythm, the rise and fall of truth before it was erased. You remember how it began, in the days when names were still whispered by women, and your pulse stutters. Because you were never supposed to remember that. Because they told you history was what survived the flood, not what was drowned by it. Because they taught you to revere the written word but never questioned who was allowed to write it. You pressed the scroll to your chest. There were names here once. Names not carried by sons, not folded into the mouths of priests or etched into genealogy. Names like breath, like thunder, like lullabies sung to daughters when no one else was listening. You remember Azura, Aklia, Naama. You remember the girl who planted bitter herbs beside her sister's grave, and the one who left her family to follow starlings into the desert. You remember the ones who whispered spells that weren't spells at all, just survival, just memory, just knowing how to keep a baby warm with stones and cloth when no one came to help. They were all here. You don't know how it was taken, if it was scraped clean by hands, afraid of what it contained, or if the ink itself chose to vanish rather than let its truth be used as fuel for a world that would never speak its name. But you know this. Something powerful was here. And now, it's your turn. You sit in the dust. The others won't miss you for a while. They're busy naming livestock, planning another altar, arguing over whose bloodline matters most. You lay the scroll across your lap and close your eyes. You write, not with pen, not with ink, but with breath, with memory, with every ache in your bones that still longs to be heard. You speak the names again, the stories, the births and burials no one recorded. The first laugh after pain, the final cry that went unanswered. You write what you remember, what your mother remembered, what the world would rather forget. And the scroll listens. Maybe it won't last. Maybe it will crumble before the sun sets. Maybe someone will find it and call it useless. Maybe someone will burn it. But for now, it holds you. And you hold it. Not because you expect anyone to read it, but because you refuse to let it be empty. Because even if the world built on suns never says your name, you said it. You said it loud. You said it soft. You said it enough to shake the silence that buried you. You find a scroll with no ink, but it finds you. And for one quiet moment, that is enough. They sit in circles now, in rooms with walls you helped build, with scrolls made of skins you scraped, with fires stoked from wood you gathered, carried, bled for. They sit with clean robes and heavy rings, surrounded by ink, and decide what never happened. You never happened. Not like that, they say. Not with names or voices or sacred purpose. Not with stories worth recording. The priests call you a myth. They stroke their beards and speak in phrases that float above the ground, detached from soil, from womb, from sweat. Women, they say, were made to carry burdens, not bloodlines. To hold the fruit, not the seed. To echo, not originate. You hear this from behind the curtain, the one they think muffles everything. As if your hearing is less sacred, as if your silence is consent. You grip the edge of your apron. You are older now. Not old, not yet, but weathered. Knees that remember kneeling, hands that don't smooth easily. A back that knows how to bend without breaking. You've borne children into a world that forgets their mothers the second they're weaned. You've buried more than you birthed, and still they sit and speak of your kind as if you are legend. A helper, a rib, a vessel, never the clay itself. One priest claims women are like the earth, soft, shaped by others, passive. The others nod. They like that metaphor. None of them have ever bled into the earth. None have screamed into it. None have buried daughters in it and planted nothing for the grief. You have. You lean closer to the curtain. You want to say something, not to argue, not to fight, just to remind them that myth is not absence. Myth is memory, with the names rubbed off. Myth is what they call truth, that didn't get permission. You want to tell them that burdens don't carry themselves, that if they traced the lineage of every king, every priest, every prophet back far enough, they would find you. Not your name, your scream. They say you never led. But who taught the first boy how to wash himself? Who ground the wheat they used for offering? Who bandaged the knees of the men who now claim dominion over heaven itself? You did. You. Without witness, without credit, without parchment. They call that ordinary. You call it everything. You step away from the curtain. There's no point now. They're sealing the scrolls, closing the records. The genealogy is finished, they say, as if blood ever stops moving. You return to the place you sleep, the corner of the compound where the sun only reaches in winter. You pull out the bone you kept hidden beneath your mat. Just a fragment, from a lamb, smoothed clean. You dip the end in crushed ash and water. You begin to write, not in their tongue, in yours. The one your mother used when she braided your hair. The one your sister whispered when the baby was crowning. The one the wind still knows. You write, we were never myths. We were the fire before the altar, the teeth before the blessing, the blood before the law. You etch until the ash runs out. Then you wrap the bone in cloth and place it beneath the floor where the girls sweep. Maybe someday one will feel it. Maybe not. It doesn't matter, because you're done waiting. The priests can chant, can declare, can erase, but they cannot stop the hum in the throats of daughters who do not know why they flinch when men rewrite history. They cannot silence the calluses passed down like scripture. They cannot unknow the truth they buried in your chest. You were not a myth. You were a woman. And that was always enough. They blamed you for a moment you didn't witness, a choice you didn't make, a fruit you never touched. You weren't there when the serpent spoke, weren't there when Eve's hand trembled toward knowledge, weren't there when Adam looked at her and decided to follow. You were not present. You were in the other clearing, washing the blood out of cloth, gathering bitter roots, feeding the youngest child from the last of the mash. You were kneeling over stone, scrubbing something you didn't stain. But they blamed you anyway, not directly. That would require acknowledging you were real. They blamed you like the wind blames the reed, like rain blames the dust, like priests blame silence for what echoes. They rewrote the story and left you out, then used your absence to condemn you. Women sinned, they said. Daughters bear the curse. She reached for what was forbidden, and now you all must bleed. You blinked, wiped your hands on your robe, looked around for the speaker. But it wasn't a conversation. It was a decree. And suddenly, your back hurt more. Your labor grew sharper. Your eyes weren't met as often. Your name was used less. Because you were woman, and that was enough to carry guilt, even without presence, even without voice, even without memory. You asked once quietly why they spoke of the fall like it was a moment, like it was a cliff, like everything before it was light and everything after was ash. You remembered Eve differently, not as a villain, but as a woman who looked truth in the face and did not look away, who bit into a mystery and learned how to bleed with dignity. You remembered her weeping into her own hands, asking if the animals would ever forgive her. You remembered her kissing her children with a mouth still raw from exile. You remembered her trying, even when the world grew teeth. But the men didn't want that Eve. They wanted a scapegoat. They wanted a symbol. They wanted sin wrapped in softness. So they chose you, all of you. You, the invisible. You, the voiceless. You, the one folding the blanket behind the story. You are the curse, they said. You are why the ground rebels. You are why pain exists. And yet, you stayed. You stayed when the world burned through its first innocence. You stayed when children turned on each other. You stayed when men built altars without asking who first taught them how to light fire. You stayed when it was your hands burying Abel. Your hands holding Eve when her knees buckled. Your hands weaving silence into survival. But still, they pointed. They called your hips dangerous, your tongue deceitful, your mind too easily swayed. They made laws out of your body, wrote rituals around your blood, built temples with rules that kept you outside the gate. And when you asked why, they pointed back to the fall, to the fruit, to the lie you never told, the room you were never in. You carried the shame anyway, folded it into your skin, wove it into the cradle songs, passed it to your daughters with prayers you weren't sure were safe to say aloud. You told them, you are not the mistake, and they nodded. But they didn't believe you, because the world had already decided. It had already blamed. It had already erased you from the first chapters, and condemned you and everyone that followed. You tried to rewrite it, once. With charcoal on dried bark, you drew a woman standing, not kneeling. You wrote beneath it, she was not there, but she was blamed. The bark cracked, the wind took it. You buried the rest. Because even stories need to survive. And you always knew how to survive. But some nights, the air feels different, like it remembers, like it carries a truth older than blame. A truth whispered in a mother's voice. She was not there, but she was blamed. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the world still aches. Because the first lie was not the serpent's. It was silence, and it was yours. The earth is still warm when you start to dig. Not because the sun was kind today. It wasn't. But because the body beneath it still carries the heat of someone who was just alive. You don't use a shovel. You use your hands. Your nails break. Your knuckles split. You do not cry. Not yet. She had your eyes. That soft brown that catches gold when the firelight hits right. She had your smile too, crooked and knowing. The kind that looked like it belonged to someone who'd heard every joke in the world and still thought it was worth laughing. She was born 3 seasons after your second child, and 3 seasons before your last. No one marked her arrival with a feast. No priest anointed her name. No man ever wrote down the shape of her footsteps. But she mattered. And now she is gone. She died in the way most women do. Quietly. In service. While carrying something that was never meant to be hers alone. She died during the washing. In the middle of the river. Arms full of fabric. She slipped. Her head struck stone. The current took her before anyone noticed she was missing. And when they found her, they sighed. Not wept, not screamed, just sighed. As if she were another burden lifted. As if she were wheat that spoiled. As if she had not been singing just yesterday while stirring lentils, off-key and beautiful. They said, she was always a little strange. They said, she shouldn't have gone alone. They said, these things happen. You said nothing. You watched them lower her onto the woven mat. You watched them wrap her like bread dough, all limbs and linen. You watched them forget. Then you took her body while they weren't looking, dragged it behind the fig grove, past the thorn bushes, past the place where the goats refused to walk, to the edge of the dry place, where you buried a stillborn son 6 years ago. You never told them that. They never asked. The ground knows you now. It opens more easily when it's your hands pressing against it. You lower her in. You pause. You trace the line of her cheek. Still soft, still yours. You remember how she used to sleep curled beside you, before the men decided she was old enough to be useful. You remember the way she plucked snails from the rocks with 2 fingers, humming under her breath like the world was a song only she could hear. She never fought for a name, never asked why the record skipped her. She just smiled, helped, stayed. You were supposed to go first. She said that once, joking. Said, you're the storm. I'm just the wind before it. You laughed then. You didn't laugh much after. Now she's under the soil, and the sky does not pause. No cloud darkens. No bird stills. The world continues, and it feels obscene. You gather stones, not many, just enough to keep the jackals from pulling her back. You place them in a circle, not a grave, not officially, just a marker. She never had a page, but she will have this. You kneel beside it when you're done. Press your forehead to the warm dust. You whisper, I remember you. That's all. That's everything. The stars come out. You stay. No one calls for you. No one notices the missing bowl, the skipped task, the extra silence. They are used to not seeing you, to not seeing her. That's why this hurts in a way you don't know how to explain. Not because she's gone, but because of how easy it was for the world to lose her. You take a strand of your hair and tie it around one of the stones. A ritual you made up. One that no one will understand. One that doesn't need to be understood. You say her name, not the name the men might have given her, had they bothered. The name she whispered to you in the dark one night, the one she said came in a dream, the one that felt like water on your tongue. You say it again. Then you leave. But part of you stays. Because the page she never had, the one they never gave her, you'll carry it now, inside your ribs, beneath your tongue, behind your eyes. So that when they look at you and say, you're quiet today, you'll know it's because you're holding 2 voices now. And one of them still sings off-key. And one of them still laughs at nothing. And both of them deserve to be heard. You don't remember when you started singing. only that it began as breath, then rhythm, then ache. A sound not meant for anyone else. A sound you made just to keep yourself from vanishing. It doesn't follow a tune. There's no melody, no lyre, no drum. Just your own voice, rising from your chest like steam from a cracked bowl. It starts low, in the back of your throat, where silence used to sit. It hums against your teeth. It vibrates your ribs. You hum while grinding grain, while folding wool, while boiling water that will never stay warm. You hum when the men speak and your name is not included. You hum when your feet bleed, when the child will not sleep, when the gods feel like myths and the myths feel more real than your own memory. No one asks what you're singing. They don't call it a song. They call it muttering. They call it noise. A woman's noise, the kind that fills space without taking up any of it. But they notice when you stop, because silence always carries more weight after a woman has filled the air. The first time a child copies your humming, it catches you off guard. She's barely old enough to speak, but she hums it exactly, your strange wordless pattern, like it was stitched into her, like she was born remembering it. You stop stirring and look at her. She smiles, keeps humming. You realize you've passed it on. Not a legacy, not a lineage, just a sound. But maybe that's enough. Because what else can you give? No name written in stone. No story told at the fire. No history that doesn't start with wife of, or mother to, or the other woman who. So you give the song. Breath. Rhythm. Ache. It grows in you. Deepens. You start to sing it under your breath as you walk, as you sew, as you bury the dead no one remembers by name. You hum it to the sheep, to the trees, to the wind. You hum it while looking at stars you'll never map, while bleeding without ritual, while laboring without witness. Sometimes the ache sharpens into words, not many, just enough to remind the silence that you have teeth, that you've bitten back generations of forgetting. They are not poetic words, not priest-approved, but they rise like prayers anyway. I am here. I remember her. My body is not shame. This grief has a name, even if I don't. I was not the mistake. The others start to hear it too. At first, they join you softly. One by one, a low murmur beside the fire. A second voice while grinding grain. A third during childbirth. You never ask them to. But women know when a sound is meant to carry something sacred, especially when no one else calls it holy. They do not harmonize. It's not pretty, but it's real. And for once, your breath feels shared, not stolen. Then one day, a boy tries to mimic it. Just a child, but already taught not to sound like you. He laughs when he gets it wrong. The others laugh too, but you don't. Because something sacred just tried to be remembered and was turned into a joke. The ache sharpens. You don't stop singing, but you take it deeper. Into the marrow. Into the space beneath your ribs where the old names live. You only sing now when the world is quiet, when the air listens, when it feels like the trees themselves might echo. The hymn becomes your heartbeat. It is not written down. There are no notes. No temple will ever play it. But the dirt knows it. The blood remembers. The bones hum it in sleep. And that, somehow, feels like enough. Because not everything worth remembering needs a name. Sometimes, it only needs a breath, a rhythm, and the ache of someone refusing to be erased. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not incense, not blood, not the acrid sting of a burnt offering. It smells like bark and rain-soaked soil and something old and green, something that hasn't been crushed yet. You open your eyes slowly, not from fear, from caution, from the ache of waking too many times to the same forgetting. But this time, You are not waking in a cradle made of reeds, not in a tent with smoke clinging to your hair, not on stone with the damp of morning in your lungs. This place is different. It is not Eden, too heavy with memory. It is not a grave, though the silence holds hands with death. It is something in between. You are lying beneath a tree, not the tree, not the one they blamed, not the one they mythologized into shame and nakedness. This one is crooked, knotted. Its roots show, its bark peels. It looks like it's been struck by lightning and survived, like it's seen exile and grew anyway. You sit up slowly. The ground beneath you is soft, not sand, not dust, something fertile, something with a pulse. You run your fingers through it, and it doesn't recoil. It welcomes. For the first time, the earth does not ask for blood first. You look around. The world is quiet, but not empty. There are no altars, no scrolls, no monuments to sons of sons of sons. There are no names carved into stone. Only sounds. Bird song, wind, breath. You don't see anyone, but you feel someone. And that is what freezes you. Because all your life, you've been the one who watched, the one who listened while they spoke, the one who picked up the pieces after the prophets dropped them, the one who remembered what the priests forgot. You've lived in the margins of stories that were built on your back. You were not made to be seen, but someone is watching. Not like a judge, not like a man, like the way a mother watches a child who has just come home with a wound they don't know how to explain. You do not move. You wait. The wind shifts. It rustles the leaves above you. The tree creaks like bones realigning. You place your palm against the trunk. It is warm. And then you hear it. A voice. Not outside. Inside. Like it's blooming from the marrow of your ribs. I remember you. 3 words. No thunder. No flame. Just truth. And you break. Not into sobs. Into stillness. The kind of stillness that only comes after centuries of being asked to keep moving, while the world forgets your footsteps. You close your eyes and lean into the tree. And for the first time, you feel what it's like to be held without being used. You whisper, "Who are you?" And the voice says, "I am the one who kept the part they left out." You blink. You think of your sisters, the ones who bled in silence, the ones who birthed lineages without thanks, the ones who vanished before they were ever written. You think of your own name, buried in ash, unspoken for generations. And you ask, was it all for nothing? The tree groans. The voice answers gently. You were the root. They worshipped the branches. You laugh. It's dry, bitter, honest. Then softer, the voice says, you were never forgotten, only hidden. But even hidden, things grow. You look down at your hands. They are older, worn, but still yours. You think of all the times you carried a child without rest, all the times you bit your tongue, all the times you gave your portion first. You think of every hymn hummed alone, every sister buried in unmarked soil, and you realize you are not alone anymore. You rise to your feet. The ground doesn't groan beneath you. It lifts, as if it's glad you're standing. You look ahead, and you see them. Women. Not many, but enough. Sitting in circles, writing in dust, braiding each other's hair with threads of silver, tending fires that never burn out. They see you, and they smile. Not the polite smile of someone making room, the smile of recognition, of reunion. You walk toward them. The hymn begins before you reach them. Not yours, theirs. But it carries your rhythm, the one you thought was forgotten. One of them hums it under her breath like she was born remembering it. You sit among them. No one asks your name, because they already know it. One of them places her hand over yours. "You were the breath they never recorded," she says, "and the breath still moving." The tree behind you rustles. The wind smells like ash and honey. And for the first time in all your lifetimes, you do not feel erased. You feel written, not in ink, in presence, in song, in soil, in the hush before someone listens. And this time, someone is listening.